Okay, we're going to get started. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning to those of you on the West Coast. Welcome to our Nonprofit Advisory Board and FAR program today, entitled The Top 5 Operational Challenges Facing Nonprofits Today. This is a joint program of the Nonprofit Advisory Board and FAR. Our program today features 5 outstanding panelists. As we all know, a great panel means great panelists, and we have 5 true rock stars in their fields today. I'm very excited to have all of them here. I know all of them, have worked closely with all of them in the past, and I'm very excited for all of the insights they're going to share with you today. Just so you know about the format here today, this is going to be kind of a rapid fire, essentially a 75-minute extended Q&A session with me posing a lot of different questions to our panelists. But I also want you guys, our registrants here today, to pose questions as well using the chat feature. The Q&A feature is disabled on today's webinar, but the chat feature is live. So feel free to pose your questions. In some cases, some of the panelists may respond to you directly. In other cases, I will pose questions to our panelists, but keep them coming. And even though we have 5 different topic areas we're going to cover, we are going to go back and forth, and we can certainly revisit topics that we covered earlier in the webinar. Before we go further, I want to turn things over to Donna, Executive Director of FAR, for a few welcoming remarks. Donna?
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Hi, everyone. I'm Donna Shafali, Executive Director of FAR. And I want you to know that we are pleased to be part of this. I think this is the 2nd or 3rd time we've partnered with the National Nonprofit Advisory Board, and it's always a great collaborative relationship. And I want to thank Jeff and all the panelists today for sharing their expertise. For those of you that don't know who FAR is, we like to think of ourselves as the welcoming community in the DC metro area. There are welcoming people, believe me. And it's where association and nonprofit leaders in finance, HR, and IT, we can gather to network, exchange ideas, and really have some valuable resources accessible to you. So you'll probably be hearing from me after the webinar for those of you who aren't members. But again, to our panelists today, thank you. And Jeff, I'm going to turn it back to you to kick it off. And I'm going to mute myself and turn off my camera and pay attention.
Thanks, Donna. And we're always pleased to partner up with FAR on these. You guys have been a terrific partner with the Nonprofit Advisory Board, and we're thrilled with the relationship. So we have about 170 registrants from all across the country, a wide array of association and nonprofit executives and others that work with associations and nonprofits, a really terrific group of all of you with us here today, and we're excited about that. Also want to let you know that today's program is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to all registrants likely tomorrow. And feel free to share that recording link with colleagues or others that you think would benefit from it. To get us started, I'm going to turn it over to each of our panelists to give a brief introduction of themselves. They can introduce themselves better than I could do them justice. And then after that, we'll dive right in. So Sarah, do you want to get us started and tell everyone who you are?
Sure. I'm Sarah Hens. I'm very excited to be here with this group today. So my background started out in IT and tech and government contracting, working on finance and administration, and then really focusing on HR as kind of a core piece of that equation. And about 5 years ago, really took a big shift over to nonprofit support. And I bring some of that for-profit sensibility in some ways. My background is pretty broad, but I really love the puzzle of compensation and benefits and employee engagement, and really ways to use tools to better manage your organization and get better results. So I know this will be a good tie-in for everybody here today. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. And Sarah was a panelist on one of the prior programs that we did last year, and was a terrific addition to that panel. Chad?
Yeah, hi, I'm Chad. I'm a senior CISO advisor at Hartman Executive Advisors. And I've been there for a little over a year. And what I like to do there is help clients across different industries build and enhance their information security programs and make sure that those security programs support their strategic goals. So my mission is to make sure that I'm communicating cybersecurity as a business risk, not just something that lives within IT. and work with business leaders to make sure that they can make informed decisions about their cybersecurity risk and prioritize finite investments that they have to make in those areas that make the biggest impact on their security posture.
Thank you, Chad. And Chad's colleague, Christina Ryan and Hartman are members of the Nonprofit Advisory Board, along with Sarah's company, TPO. And our next panelist to introduce himself, Jordan Forney of Bernstein. Jordan.
Thank you, Jeff. Grateful to be a part of this group here today. My name is Jordan Forney. I'm an investment advisor at Alliance Bernstein. For those that don't know AB, we're a global investment management and research firm, and we have a centralized group that serves the nonprofit community. So that foundation and institutional advisory group oversees about $9 billion across the country. And that is the primary focus of my practice here in the Mid-Atlantic, working with membership associations, advocacy organizations, endowments, foundations, you name it, any sort of charitable organization, ranging from size and scope, with the main objective of growing a reserves portfolio, but just as importantly, expanding the organizations that we serve, their missions and impact.
Thank you, Jordan. And next, the panelist with by far the coolest microphone of anyone on the panel today, Lauren.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I come with all of my accessories and neon signs, and hopefully that's not the most interesting part of what I'm going to say today. But I'm Lauren Lemunyon. I am the founder and CEO of Spitfire Coach. We are an executive coaching and leadership development training firm based in Denver, Colorado, and really all over the world. And we focus on equipping mid-level managers, nonprofit executives with the tools to do their jobs better. So help unloading all of those to-do lists, stress, miscommunications, feedback, all that jazz. And what we do is really based on my experience in working with associations since 2005. And I'm back at it again, managing a trade association. I can't get enough of you guys. So I'm hoping to bring some insights today on the employee experience, the trends I'm seeing, the dynamics of boards and volunteers. And we're going to get a little spicy today. So I'm excited to be here.
Thank you, Lauren. And last but not least, the one panelist who is a client of ours. The other four of you are, like myself, consultants and other professionals that work with associations and nonprofits. And I work with all of you, but I get to work with Therese and her organization as a client of ours for several years. So Therese, can you introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, it's hard to follow up, Lauren. I'm just going to be honest, but I maybe less on the spice. But hi, everybody. My name is Therese Longcar. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Academy of Management, a 19,000 member professional association of global professors and PhDs in business schools. I am responsible for an $11 million operating budget that includes membership, our conferences and events that nonprofits put on to convene our members, as well as publishing, including 6 scholarly journals, 2 publications, and a non-dues revenue stream. So I am really glad to be here today and talk about what keeps us up at night.
Thank you, Therese, and thank you to all of you for being here today. So with that, we're going to dive right in, and we're going to start off with certainly one of the hottest topics, not only for associations and nonprofits, but for every employer these days in the United States, and that's HR recruiting and retention. So why don't I get things started with Sarah? Sarah, I have several questions for you, so if you can just try to, like I've told all of you, keep your answers concise, but meaty and relevant. We want to try to get as much information out there. This is going to be a lot of information overflow. Your mind is probably going to explode by the end of this program, but hopefully it'll be a lot of great takeaways for you. And as we always try to do with these programs, focus on a lot of practical advice and guidance that you can take back to your own organizations or your own clients, and pass on a lot of really useful information. So we all hear about the incredible amount of turnover that's going on in the nonprofit world. According to Lauren, who gave me the statistic, in 2021, more than 47 million workers across the United States quit their jobs. That's quite a staggering number, unlike anything that any of us have ever seen in our lifetimes and our careers. But with that, Sarah, is there an upside to turnover?
Absolutely. This is something that is kind of foreign in the nonprofit world. People think that longevity is the goal, but turnover is useful if you have the opportunity to bring in new ideas and skills with new hires. It's great. But the other thing to consider, alumni are valuable. You know, if you're a very small 10, 20 person group, you cannot promise somebody a full career trajectory. But what you can promise is being part of their network and taking advantage of that yourselves as an organization. So I think turnover, for individuals is good, but for organizations, it really gives you an opportunity to build that network and some depth in your connections.
And so while that's a great point, and a point I think a lot of people don't focus on, at the same time, we don't always want turnover, and especially when you have high value staff, you certainly don't want them to leave and turn over within your organization. What are some tips or strategies for retaining, Sarah, high value staff?
So high value staff, it's in that your high value staff could be some of your junior staff, right? It's not necessarily somebody at a senior level, but look beyond pay. Are there training opportunities? Can you come up with ways to change or cross train them? Can you come up with ways to give them special projects to broaden their skills? I know for so many groups, pay is a cornerstone of compensation. Obviously, it also can compound itself with benefits and other things. So as a cost, you want to manage it, but there may be opportunities in training and cross-purposing what people are doing. We lost you, Jeff.
Sorry, I muted everyone for the sirens in the background, a staple here in DC. Lauren, a related question for you. What trends have you noticed in nonprofits when it comes to retention?
Well, I actually want to touch back on the turnover and ask the question, where is the turnover happening? Because I actually think there needs to be more turnover, and that's coming from volunteer boards and the C-suite. You get a lot of people sitting pretty at the top, making a ton of money, not offering any new ideas, and really preventing upward mobility for that all-star talent that can revolutionize associations. So if you have people that have been stagnant in their career, aren't moving, aren't growing, it's like the whole adage, if you're not growing, you're dying. It's the 5 to 7 year plan. If people aren't moving, then they are actually decaying the culture of your organization. And I know that's going to be a little controversial, but I'll take it. So if you have a lot of turnover only coming from entry level, where's that coming from? If you're getting it from the mid-level, it usually means that there's no opportunity upward. And it actually has very little to do with compensation, because the compensation will be peons and pennies compared to what they can make in the for-profit world and consulting. But what was the original question, Jeff?
And what trends? No, that was a great point, and definitely be as controversial as you would like.
Yes, sir.
And you probably, of all of our panelists, are known for that, which I love. So when it comes to retention, what kind of trends have you noticed in the nonprofit sector?
So big trends around retention. It's like, I haven't seen things move. I was so waiting for the pandemic to get people excited to think outside the box, to start offering new opportunities. I work a lot in the tech space, and they started thinking differently. How do we, become more accessible to parents? How do we be more accessible to people who don't live where we are? But I'm seeing the same trends of the traditional command and control coming back. And I know we're going to talk about coming back to the office, but I'm seeing this reverting back to default behaviors and not stretching to be different. And this is the opportunity for nonprofits. If you want to capture star talent, you have to understand their needs. You have to understand what gets them excited. And it's all about social impact. The only area of nonprofits that did not see a turnover increase was social impact groups. So you have to tie people into what matters to them. And I don't think that trade associations are doing, and I don't think nonprofits and societies are doing it.
Very interesting. And by the way, Sarah and Therese, feel free to chime in on any of these questions if you have other points to add.
I'm just going to say underscore and bold everything Lauren just said.
Excellent.
Agreed. Especially we saw where our total headcount went down during the pandemic. And obviously it forced us to look inward at what we were doing to retain those folks and if the ability to recruit new ones. And now we're considering some succession planning for exactly those reasons you point out, Lauren.
Excellent. Sarah, how does a nonprofit kind of reassess their hiring practice? So let's turn to the recruiting side of things now.
Yeah.
there?
I say behave like a for-profit, get lean, use your tools. I am confounded to still walk into organizations that are doing very manual processes for hiring. It is time to build the tech stack and move quickly. I think you need to be thoughtful of your timeline. You need to think about what you're looking for, figure out what your metrics are. Is it time to hire? Is it cost to hire? Is it retention? And those are going to be different, again, if you're a large organization versus 10 people. And the impacts on your organization are different. But as close as you can get to that lean and rapid for-profit model of hiring, lean into it. And candidly, for most of our nonprofits, that's who you're competing against. And those groups move fast and aggressively right now.
So
I'd
Sarah,
love to add on to that. Also, how are you identifying your headcount? Is it a full-time employee, or can you leverage contractors in the gig economy? That is the opportunity for associations. Get clear on the roles you need to fill. And if it's not a full-time person, look at outside sources. There's tons of staffing companies, Upwork, everything can fill your seats and offload the weight that's compounding on your employees.
So Sarah, how can a nonprofit kind of position itself to be an employer of choice to attract those folks in this aggressive labor market?
Well, I'm actually going to go back to something Lauren talked about with kind of that, how do you attract people in with regards to mission? And I think for some groups, they have clear missions. You know, during COVID, people were confronted with the reality of their four walls, and wanting to be part of something in addition to being paid is important. And I think there's so many groups that have compelling stories. They have, even if you're not a charitable group, even if you are an association focused on, you know, a particular technical area or trade, that's still a compelling story, and there's still a touch to people in there. So I think if you can position yourself outside of compensation and benefits as being a mission or a space people can connect to, that's pretty compelling for a lot of people. It can be amazingly attractive.
Therese, do you have any kind of examples from your own experience within Academy of Management that you can pass on here, things that have been successful, maybe even some mistakes that you guys have made in the last 2.5 years?
Yeah, there's been a lot of mistakes. Specifically with regard to hiring in HR, I think what we learned is that we needed to sort of look at some of those roles, I think exactly as Lauren and Sarah had just highlighted. Those roles where it was a lot of kind of manual processes and there wasn't a lot of innovation or improvement coming out. So when one of those positions specifically was a fallout as a result of the pandemic, we chose not to rehire. And instead we're looking at different kind of exactly the gig economy of, you know, getting some independent contractors instead. And we're lucky to be in the New York metro area that we could tap into a lot of professional skills for ad hoc and episodic work. So instead of kind of recreating the old kind of rigmarole of some roles that really weren't fulfilling for the individual and really questioning the bottom line for that role, we've now kind of embraced some of these for-profit attitudes. It might feel uncomfortable, like it doesn't fit at first, but that's the thing, is I think we're learning as we go.
Thank you. And I'd be remiss being the only lawyer on the panel to say that
we got a good contract, a good independent contractor.
Well, that's one, absolutely. Yeah, you want to make sure that you have very good contracts with your independent contractors, and there's so many different aspects of those contracts, and it's not just to ensure their independent contractor status and make sure that they're not really truly should be classified as an employee, but so many other things relating intellectual property, critically important. If an independent contractor not being an employee means that they by default own the work product, namely the copyright in everything that they create, unless it's assigned over to the employer, or not the employer, but the organization. And that can be done through the independent contractor agreement, a standard provision that says everything that I create within the scope of my work is automatically assigned over to the organization, period. And that's critically important to put in. There's so many other things: termination, compensation, expense reimbursement, and so many indemnification, so many other things. But also the issue of, and I deal with this a lot in terms of counseling clients on terminations. Just because you're going to outsource a position doesn't absolve you from potential discrimination issues and other things with respect to laying people off. Okay, it's certainly a relevant factor to factor into the analysis if you truly are going to be outsourcing a position and eliminating as an employed position, but it doesn't get you off the hook from potential liability if the individual that you're wanting to let go has a number of different protected characteristics. It can still be a very risky, dicey proposition, and there's a way to go about doing that can help mitigate your risks. Lauren, how can nonprofits be competitive with higher paying and or kind of sexier job postings?
I think it's rebranding roles. So I think that job postings need an upgrade. Like, they are sterile and boring as all get out. I think we need to jazz up, which sounds like an old-fashioned term, jazz up the way we were talking about our companies. Like, I can't tell you how many job postings I read from my clients, and I'm like, they're not even excited about what they're doing. Like, people can read energy and language. So it starts with that. It's getting the storytelling of why people are working there, what they get out of it. That's the opportunity here, is how do you snapshot your current employee experience and project that out through social media, through newsletters, because potential employees are doing their research. They are Googling you. They are on Glassdoor. So if you have things to clean up, you need to address it. You need to talk about it and own it. And I think there's, you talk about uncomfortable, like it's new. Good, that's growth, and share the growth, because that's what new hires are looking for. They don't want the same old same. They want someone who's disrupting. They want someone who's going to be accountable, that they can bring things up to and they can be part of the discussion. And just because someone is new to the company, take their ideas and show how that's incorporated. So talk is cheap, action matters.
Excellent points. Sarah, in terms of retention, we're seeing mental health concerns become much more prominent during and hopefully following COVID. Hopefully we're coming out of it, at least as a pandemic. But should nonprofit employers institute mental health leave or otherwise expand their leave program as a retention tool and to help facilitate a healthier workforce?
Again, I'll take maybe an unpopular position here. I don't think we need more leave. One thing that happens in a lot of nonprofits, financially, they can afford leave. They can add more leave in. And I think people need connection and an activity, not to be disconnected necessarily. So I am not necessarily a proponent of adding additional leave types. I also feel that the flip side of that is we have programs in place and we need people to take them. We need to make it good for people to take vacation. If you have a sabbatical program, people need to take their sabbaticals, not wait 1, 2, 3 years out to try to maybe do that. So take advantage of what's in place. And then I think there's a space where we need to work with our supervisors to kind of coach them on how to watch and interact with their staff and look for signs that there may be something there that needs to be addressed. You can do a lot of promotion of using EAPs and other mental health tools, but I think if you can look at mental health first aid and concepts like that, and continue engagement, I think people will be better off.
Excellent. Therese,
Can I add on that?
Yeah, please.
I think we need to look deeper at our cultures. So if you are having people needing to take leave, you are talking about a culture that is not safe for people, whether it's a manager, managers, teams, processes, workload. We need to start looking at what creates cultures of well-being and seeing people as human beings and not as FTEs.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting. There was actually an article in the New York Times that talked about not bringing our whole selves to work, kind of managing what's part of the work equation and part of the home equation. And I think we've lost some of that in the past couple of years with all these blurred lines. And
I could probably use some guidance from you guys in that regard, personally. Therese, anything to add on those fronts from your own organization's experiences?
Well, yes, I think that we're going to maybe get into it in some of the what's working and what's not when it comes to a remote environment. But what we did find that during the pandemic, especially because having such close proximity to the New York area, where really kind of we saw the pandemic occurring across the globe. In New York, Westchester County, specifically where we are, was one of the first counties hit. And first and foremost, it was it was a learning that this was going to have kind of deep effects both on just the health and well-being of the staff, and that we really transitioned as part of transitioning to a remote work environment. We also transitioned to kind of like a check-in environment, and not just for how's the work going, but of course, how's your mental health going? Because I know I was doom scrolling till all hours of the night, you know, finding out more and more, and we were remote for 2 years. So now as we're coming out and sort of getting used to being with one another again, we've just kind of doubled down on the need for disconnecting, do not send emails after 5 p.m. and putting up real boundaries to protect people's kind of time away from the office.
Yeah, so the emails I sent to my clients the other night at like 2:30 a.m., probably not a good idea, right? I will never stop doing that, but I don't expect people to get back to me at 3:30 a.m. All right, we're going to pivot. We're going to come back to remote work, how to make more successful remote work environments. And I know several of you have some great insights there, and also how to deal with getting people back into the office successfully and effectively. But we'll come back to those in a few minutes. We're going to pivot now. And Jordan, I'm going to turn to you. I'm not looking for you to be an economic forecaster. We all see our 401k and investment balances kind of have taken a nosedive in recent weeks and months, I guess. It's depressing to all of us, I have no doubt. Certainly is to me, but we're talking about nonprofits here. And for nonprofit organizations, how, you know, what sort of macroeconomic trends, capital development trends are affecting nonprofits the most?
Yeah, I wish I could say this is the fun part of the conversation, because a lot of the news on that front has been directionally negative. And I think about a number of the webinars that we've hosted together, Jeff, over the past, call it 18 to 24 months. And some of those issues that we discussed are still relevant. And we'll talk about here today around employment issues, real estate considerations, and things along those lines. But the list goes on and on, right? Concerns around global growth, the geopolitical concerns with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, energy prices, supply chain disruptions, you name it. I think for purposes of where I sit and how we're supporting organizations right now, we're working with those that are in the enviable position of having a sizable cash position. And that cash is there for a multitude of reasons, whether it's been passively built up over time, whether they receive some pandemic relief funds, maybe they de-risked a portfolio over the past 2 years. But we've also seen an evolution in philanthropy more broadly, such that they've received transformational gifts. Maybe they sold a building. In any event, organizations that we work with have cash. And so when I think about the most influential macroeconomic factors, it would be the one that we're reading about all the time, that is inflation. Inflation and interest rates probably as a close second. And the reason why that's important for the organizations that have these operating reserves, the spending power of those reserves are lessened by way of heightened levels of inflation. Now, there is some upside associated with interest rates where you may be able to get a little bit more from your cash now, where you used to only get, call it 0.00 whatever percent. And now that's flirting with 2-3%, whatever it is. But that also can come with borrowing costs as rates go up too. So for those organizations that have borrowing options, have existing mortgages, I really think it's the combination of inflation and interest rates for organizations that have cash that really need to think seriously about how much cash should they be holding.
So Jordan, you know, just like, you know, most of us that have 401ks and investment accounts and whatnot, and other retirement vehicles, we're usually saving it for retirement. That's, you know, for individuals, that's usually the number one reason, at least folks like all of us here. But for a nonprofit organization, there are different reasons. It's certainly not for retirement, but you know, for most nonprofits and associations, you know, it generally these are long-term reserves. They're not designed, you know, that you're going to spend half of your reserves next year. Of course, there's rainy day funds, and a lot of nonprofits had to tap into those funds during the early part of the pandemic when they saw revenues go way down. But overall, in every one of your clients, it's different. The advice you give them is different. Obviously, they all have different investment management strategies. But in general, with the turbulence of the stock market, what sort of, if you have some general trends that you've seen, how are you advising your clients? You're advising them to pull money out of stocks and put them into bonds and treasuries, and obviously it's never an all or nothing. But tell us some trends in terms of how you're advising your clients to deal with this turbulence.
Yeah, you've given me a lot of outs here, Jeff, because I do think I can preface every answer with "it depends." And so I'll start there. But definitely a thoughtful approach to holding reserves is something that's always been prudent. And what we really emphasize is not really in the camp of a rule of thumb, but instead matching time horizon with risk. And so I can appreciate that I'm incentivized, of course, to sit here and say you should never have any cash. That's not true. You should have an emergency fund for monies that you may need over the next, call it 12 months or so. And we recognize organizations may need to reserve for special projects or programs or in anticipation of a spike in spending needs. And that plus the general disposition of, as we've talked about, a lean staff, a volunteer board of directors, they have their own opinions around how monies should be allocated. And that certainly factors in too. But on the time horizon and risk matching, really just thinking about where could there be any sort of shortfall risk associated with the cash flows for the organization. This was super top of mind during the pandemic. When you think about, or at least the associations that have annual conferences that didn't happen. This actually happened to an organization that I worked with not too long ago, just because of Hurricane Ian, where they were going to go down to Florida and they had to cancel their conference. So if there's any sort of risk, that would certainly justify having more by way of reserves. I know a number of organizations also have timing differences associated with the ins and outs, and there can be some seasonality associated with that. And then those organizations that either have the option to borrow or have a trusting and faithful alumni base that they could tap on, or donor base, that's certainly an influential factor. And so really the reserve should be based on those factors impacting shortfall risk. And if you think about the cash, those would be, I'd say, the monies that are needed, like I said, in the next 12 months. Maybe you take a next step up the short-term risk spectrum, where you have about half cash, half taxable bonds. Then as you go to intermediate and long-term, of course, you start introducing more return-seeking, growth-oriented assets as monies aren't needed further down the line. And we found, even if for aesthetics alone, just that bucketing approach to know that my long-term money is going to move up and down and be more volatile than my short-term money, and helping organizations think through the sizing of those buckets based on the operations of their organizations.
So Jordan, are you seeing a lot of your clients make changes to their investment policy statements? That's kind of the overall framework that governs it. You say, okay, this is what our board or our investment committee has adopted as our overall framework for our risk tolerance and everything else. You got to stay within these parameters and whatnot. Are you seeing a lot of your nonprofit clients make changes in their investment policy statements in light of what we've seen with the turbulence in the market?
They should be. And we're certainly advising around that right now. And we really probably should have started this entire investing conversation on that policy and governance piece, because that's going to memorialize roles and responsibilities, how decisions are made, and can even document why decisions are made. And you can outline that sort of operating reserve, intermediate reserve, long-term reserve, and have dedicated allocations around each of those investment categories, so as to govern decisions in moving forward and provide latitude across asset classes to participate in. If I were to identify some themes around the types of changes that we're recommending for organizations that do in fact have investment policy statements, so that inherently means if you don't have one, you should have one. And so that's a starting place. But for those that do have investment policy statements, and to skip to the punchline as to my best efforts to attempt at a crystal ball, returns are going to be muted. And so I've seen investment policy statements that are targeting returns 2+ inflation. And if inflation's at 8% or we end at 6%, the type of investment portfolio that can get that sort of return is well beyond the risk spectrum that you should be allotting that investment portfolio. So definitely making changes around return expectations, expectations around risk. Again, this bucketing sort of concept, and assuredly putting a fine pin on the roles and responsibilities as to those decision makers at the organization, whether those are board members, committee members, staff, and then us in this case as the fiduciary partner to that organization. So long way of saying yes, Jeff.
Yeah, and if your nonprofit does not have an investment policy statement, that's even a much bigger problem. And I do a lot of, as a nonprofit lawyer, I do a lot of board trainings for nonprofit boards on, what are your fiduciary duties that you owe to the organization? And certainly the fiduciary duty of care certainly involves the investment part of a nonprofit's structure and operations, and having an investment policy statement, revisiting it on a regular basis, especially in these times, having an investment committee or whatever committee of the board might be serving that function, like an executive committee, having them drill down and revisit on a regular basis is critically important to fulfilling those fiduciary duties.
Yeah, and I would just add something that I was remiss in mentioning, that of course the impetus for the need of all this is because of the reasons that I started with organizations having cash and thinking about deploying that cash differently. So before you make any sort of investment decision, do anything beyond cash, assuredly you should have that investment policy statement. And then semi-related, one other change that I was thinking of as you were talking, Jeff, for those organizations that have the capacity to perhaps take on a little bit of illiquidity, some alternative sources of income to help with the challenged return environment that we're in. There's certainly trade-offs associated with that. But that's another trend, just to offer some latitude in exploring things that go beyond the traditional stock and bond market for namely larger organizations who could participate in those types of strategies.
That's great advice. Therese, one more question on this topic before we move on. So as the only chief operating officer on our panel today of a good sized 501c3 association, what role did your organization's investment strategy play during the pandemic and now moving forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, what Jordan just laid out, that prescription, and that really is a prescription for how organizations have to structure their investment policy and start those conversations with their board if they haven't already, because all those steps that Jordan outlined was exactly what helped us kind of handle some of the headwinds that were coming in, that resulted from the pandemic, a loss of membership by 2,000 attendees, or 2,000 members, excuse me, having to cancel our conference. All of those actions were really kind of mitigated because of our investment policy, which has always acted as a strategic cushion for the organization. But now we're able to use it as a strategic draw. And that's because we defined exactly that what the purpose of the investment policy, which would be to protect our operating revenue, for example, for one full year. And then additional funds would be used for strategic uses. So we're still able to draw off those returns. And that's what's really helped us weather the ins and outs of the pandemic. And now we hope this is exactly what we're trying to sort of mitigate against as inflation is wreaking havoc on the reserves.
And just to build off of that too, these decisions take time. I have a call after this to where we were suggesting these investment policy changes in concert with asset allocation changes in November of 2021. And we needed to update signatories and go through this whole rigmarole in the normal course of getting the committee members together and such, that these changes really weren't implemented for months down the line. So all the more reason to start that dialogue now, if you haven't already, because it does take some time. And I see you perhaps agree with that, Therese.
Exactly. Is these conversations probably took place in the best of times over multiple board years and meetings with our audit committee. and with a really strong alignment between the staff and our officers and executive committee. And so now, like I say, we constantly revise it at each meeting and revisit the investment policy, as well as meet with our auditors and our investment firm.
Thank you, Therese. Okay, now we're going to pivot to cybersecurity threats and solutions, another one of our topics today. And for that, I'm going to turn to Chad Quarles of Hartman Advisors. So Chad, you're an expert in this space. What new developments are you seeing in the cybersecurity threat landscape that nonprofits should be aware of? Do you have any good illustrative examples that would help shed some light in this?
Yeah, I have an example I wanted to share with you guys, and then maybe one other thing to just throw in there based on the conversation you guys have been having. And as you're talking about embracing new technologies to solve some of the other challenges that you guys have been discussing, and then the shift to remote work, it makes me think as the information security guy in the room is like, how are you guys considering what impact that's had on your overall cybersecurity posture? What new risks have been introduced over the recent period? And have you considered how that impacts the organizations that you work for? So, remote work and new applications or new technologies that are accessible from anywhere leads kind of right into this new threat that I wanted to share with you guys and make sure you're aware of. And it's the end result is nothing new, but it's really the tactic with which they're using to get there. And it's a new account takeover tactic that we've seen growing in popularity in 2022. And the sort of the most concerning piece of it is that it's defeating multi-factor authentication, which is one of those things that we always harp on to make sure that our clients are adopting and enforcing multi-factor authentication. So this real world example happened with Uber, which is hit the media recently and made a big splash. So I like to use it to just add some context and explain to take this to how it works, how it has affected real world organizations that have made significant investments in cybersecurity. But basically what is happening is a tactic called MFA bombing or MFA spamming, where in this case the threat actor, who was a 17-year-old kid in the UK, he's a member of a threat actor group known as Lapsus, which is a well-known threat actor in the cybersecurity world. Well, he purchases user credentials from a contractor that worked at Uber, and then did his initial access by finding their VPN and using the legitimate credentials. So he bought this username and password, went to the web page and submitted the username and password. And Uber had done the right thing, right? They had invested in multi-factor authentication. So that resulted in a prompt to the employees, or in this case, the contractor's mobile device saying, hey, was this you authenticating? And so the first time he hits no, right? And maybe the first several times he does the right thing and hits no, but eventually through this grief attack where they continually submit those credentials, he inadvertently hit yes. And that gave the threat actor access to the internal network of Uber, where he was then able to see what inside that environment does he have access to as within the context of this legitimate user. And they were unfortunately able to escalate privileges by finding additional credentials, usernames and passwords that were saved on a file server on that network, and use that elevated privileges to access a lot of sensitive data about their stakeholders. So probably driver information, passenger information, other stakeholders, email communications, and exfiltrate that data outside of the organization.
That's scary stuff. And we all see it. We read about it every day. We read about data breaches. We read about ransomware. We read about all these other really disturbing things going on in your world. So hearing, that one of those latest threats, what do you pull away from that in terms of what can nonprofits do to detect and prevent those sort of cybersecurity threats, to protect their technology infrastructure and their critical information? Kind of what best practices do you pull out of that? What are some good practical advice and tips and suggestions you can give to folks?
Right, yeah, and that is that there's really no one silver bullet. So MFA, we always harp on that as a very effective control and important to have in place. But this example just illustrates that we can't depend on one technical control alone. So it's important to have a layered information security program that has multiple layers. One of which is our user awareness, a culture of cybersecurity awareness at our organizations. So, almost in every case, it's very rare that there's ever a data breach or a cybersecurity incident where there's no human factor. Almost always, there's some interaction with a user to be socially engineered or tricked into doing something. So raising cybersecurity awareness within your organization is a key thing. Let's make sure that our employees are an effective layer of defense and not the weakest link that we're trying to protect against. We want them to be a functioning layer of our effective security program.
So, Chad, it sounds like you're suggesting, we're all familiar with all different sorts of trainings that get done. I talked about nonprofit boards, but all sorts of trainings that get done for staff on a regular basis. There's always been a ton in the HR area. Unconscious bias trainings, DEI trainings, performance management trainings. I do a lot of, antitrust trainings on intellectual property protection and licensing, all this other stuff.
Right.
About, UBIT and tax exemption. But it sounds like, and I don't think, at least in my experience, this is not the norm. In fact, I even think, for our 6-person Tenenbaum Law Group boutique law firm, that we ought to have some training, because literally all of my colleagues and I get these sorts of, I don't even know the labels to put on these things, but all these attempts, to try to get information, get people to click on things. And it sounds like from a small firm like ours to a larger association or nonprofit, it sounds like some regular training for all staff on what sort of things to look out for, what sort of things to avoid, what are some good, tips and suggestions for staff, that they should be doing on a regular or daily basis, things like that. Is that something that you think, I don't want to ask you if you're seeing it more often, because I don't think it's really happening yet, but is something that you would recommend?
Yeah, I think the key, especially as you mentioned, all those regular trainings that employees are required to take. I think it's critical to have short, interactive user training sessions that are frequent. And figuring out what the right frequency is for your organization based on the size and the bandwidth and things like that will be important. But I think keeping it short and sweet and interactive, so that employees realize how this can improve both their professional security posture, but also in their personal lives as well. But I think I'm finding that one long, like 45-minute annual security training really isn't cutting it. It's painful, the employees don't enjoy it, and it's not keeping cybersecurity top of mind. So I think if you can find a tool out there, there are a number of them that I've used in the past that can deliver short and interactive training sessions to keep cybersecurity top of mind. And then the next step is to do some testing, right, to measure the effectiveness of that awareness. How effective are your employees at identifying those social engineering, those phishing emails? Are they interacting with the phishing message, or are they reporting it how you'd like them to? Figuring out how effective that user awareness program is critical.
And Jeff, if I could just add on that,
Sure.
Also, I think it's just mindful when I can't personally speak to it, but in working with my HR director, when you go in and get your insurance for your organization, obviously there's more enhanced cybersecurity insurance that you, of course, want to take advantage of. And that means that we do have to, we have a responsibility then, of course, to train our staff. So we've had to really, as an organization, really pay very strict attention to that in order to pursue this insurance as an organization.
That's a great point. I wanted to emphasize that is that, especially in industries where we don't have compliance obligations or regulatory requirement to have certain elements of a security program, what I'm seeing is that cyber insurance carriers are really driving the maturity of information security programs by raising the requirements as you go to shop for cyber liability insurance. And that's such an important, control to help you manage this risk, is to have that tool in place, the cyber insurance, to help you out and get through weather the storm if and when you do have a cybersecurity event. So they are becoming more and more selective as they continue to take losses, as cybersecurity continues to be a growing problem. So what I'm seeing is those cyber carriers, all companies across all industries, want to and need to have cyber insurance. And the the more difficult it is to place that insurance policy is causing it to drive organizations towards more mature cybersecurity programs.
Yeah, I've absolutely seen that. Every year, it seems like the requirements that cyber insurance carriers are imposing on policyholders in order to get the insurance, from small to large, even including our own law firm. And we had to go out, which is a good thing, and even increasing our cybersecurity protections, which obviously all costs money, takes time, but you don't have a choice if you want to have cyber insurance, and you have to have cyber insurance. And just I had drinks last night with someone from a large insurance broker that focuses on the nonprofit market, and he was telling me that cyber, of all the 6 primary types of insurance that nonprofits and associations have, the premiums for cyber insurance are jumping higher than any other, and at a faster clip. All right, one more question, Chad, and then we're going to move on to our last 2 topics. So I know you've told me that, in terms of when threat actors get in, what are you seeing them do? And you told me that ransomware is kind of the fastest growing type of attack. When a threat actor gets in, well, I should take it a step back. What can a nonprofit do to manage the risk of ransomware?
Yeah, great point. Yeah, because ransomware is continuing to be the fastest growing attack type. Once they get in, that's their most efficient way to monetize that unauthorized access that they have to your systems and your data. I've read statistics, right, that in 2021, there was a 13% increase in ransomware. Up to 25% of all reported data breaches are now a ransomware incident. And as we have gotten better at defending against ransomware by having good backup and recovery strategies in place, that took care of that first evolution of ransomware, which was to hold you, extort you for access to your data. So they've encrypted your data. You can't access it unless you pay them their ransom. And as we got better at defending against that and increased our capabilities to restore access to that data with our own backup and recovery solutions, the bad guys have continued to evolve as well. And they're starting to add, what they're referring to as double, triple, or even quadruple extortion strategies, where now, in addition to just keeping your data inaccessible, they're exfiltrating that data or taking it out of your organization and threatening to make it public on the dark web or sell that information. And that's just in an effort to continue to turn up the heat on you to get you to pay that extortion. If you continue to, not pay the extortion based on that, we're seeing them do denial of service attacks on maybe your website. So try and knock your public website offline so that your constituents or your members can't reach your website. And then even is going as far as contacting your donors or community members directly, letting them know that, hey, we've got access to your sensitive data. We got it from this organization. Just trying to continue to raise the heat on you to get you to pay that ransom. But, your question of what can we do? I mean, I think the most important thing we can do is have an incident response plan. So you don't want to be trying to figure out what to do and how you're going to respond to these situations and thinking about it for the first time during a live security incident. You want to have a plan and test that plan periodically, at least annually. Go through a tabletop exercise where someone can lead you through a developing cybersecurity incident and pose these questions to you. Get your business leaders thinking, how would they respond? What impact would this have on the organization if this was unavailable? Start thinking about the different impacts. And then, of course, like we mentioned, you got to have a cyber insurance policy, because this incident's going to be expensive. There's going to be specialized legal advice that you may need to have. You may need to have cyber forensics firms to come in and determine what exactly the threat actor had access to, and make sure that they're not still in your systems. And then, of course, the reputational impact it may have if your donors lose confidence, in your ability to secure their information. They may be less likely to make contributions. So that could have an impact on your income that cyber policy might be able to protect you from.
Yeah, and then one other from the legal perspective, it's not so much regulated at the federal level, but at the state level, many states have required notifications when you have data breaches and whatnot that you have to, and that gets really expensive. And doing that state by state analysis means bringing in specialized legal counsel to help, and all of that is difficult and expensive. We have two quick questions. If you can answer each one in about 30 seconds, because we got to move on from the audience. One, can you discuss the need for a rapid response of a cyber attack? I've heard from some that the first few hours can be critical.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, if you think about the different elements of a security program, and the first foundational phases are identifying what assets you have, and you want to protect what information you have to kind of reduce the likelihood of something occurring. But then after that, the inevitable incident or event is going to happen, and your ability to detect and respond to that threat is going to be important. So I think small and mid-sized organizations are not going to have a huge specialized team of cybersecurity professionals to deal with this. So establishing a relationship with a managed security service provider, particularly a managed detection and response firm, is I think in everybody's best interest to make sure that you've got some next generation endpoint security tools that are on your devices, so that they can be monitoring for suspicious or potentially malicious activity and take action to isolate your device in the moment when they discover something that's malicious. I think that's going to manage the impact of a cybersecurity event significantly.
Thanks, Chad. And one last question. We know that a lot of these ransomware attacks are demanding the ransom be paid in cryptocurrency. I presume for traceability reasons and things like that. Someone asked, should associations and nonprofits set up cryptocurrency accounts to be able to quickly pay a ransom if needed?
Yeah, that is a good part of an incident response plan, right? How you can count on their ransom being paid in Bitcoin, most likely, right? So the timing, they'll also put a timer on you, right, and say if you don't pay by this time, we're going to increase the ransom. So I think being prepared either by having a retainer with a cyber forensics firm that can kind of help you through that, navigate that, communicate with the threat actor, negotiate pricing, facilitate payments, things like that. But yeah, at a minimum, if you don't have that sort of relationship set up, establishing some sort of a Bitcoin wallet and making sure that it's not the first time you've ever signed on to one of these websites to do this. You don't want to have to figure it all out in the heat of the moment.
I think adjacent to that, and I know we're short on time here, Jeff, but we've actually gotten the question about having the capacity to accept cryptocurrency as gifts, where if you think about the tax efficiency associated with giving appreciated securities over cash, I found that more organizations are talking about that than actually instituting it, in the same way that donors are asking about it but not actually doing it. But there is some merit, and we have gotten the question.
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic, and particularly the 501c3 charitable world, in terms of gift acceptance policies and whether and how they should whether or not they should allow gifts of cryptocurrency. Okay, we got to pivot here. We're going to shift to another topic, which is strategies for successful remote work and getting staff back to the office. So, Lauren, I'm going to start with you. Where do you see gaps with nonprofit organizations in terms of getting staff back to the office?
Really simple: context and intent. So this wide sweeping, we have to get people back in the office because we have a lease, is not good enough to get people back into the office. So clarity is needed, context is needed, and intent. So there's obviously benefits for getting people back into the office. Certain people need to interact. Certain people need to be there for security reasons. You wouldn't necessarily want someone with a high clearance working from home on their laptop in a non-VPN environment that's not secured. But the reality is a lot of people do more work from home. They are more productive. They're happier. Gas is expensive. I was just in California. It was $6.50 a gallon. Things are more expensive in general. And so if we're not talking about the cost of what it takes to actually get people back into the office, we're not seeing the full picture. And so I think if you can answer, we want people back in the office because blank, and you actually believe it, then you have a good leg to stand on. But if you haven't done that initial work of actually thinking through what the purpose is of getting people back into the office and who needs to be back there and why, then you need to do a little bit more thinking before you can put a policy in place, before you can communicate that, before you can have consistency. Because right now it's all duct taped together. It's one thing for one person, one thing for another. And people are looking at those contradictory practices and policies and saying, well, why do I have to do it?
Yeah, and that's a great point. And there's a legal aspect, like there is to most things that I advise on quite a bit, which is that you have to be sure that whatever your remote work versus in-person or hybrid type situation is, that you have to treat similarly situated staff consistently and objectively. Otherwise, you run the risk of discrimination claims.
Yeah, and there was just an article about how people who were in the office were being favored for upward mobility. And so you need to look at that because that's discrimination too.
It's highly problematic for women who have been in situations where they can choose. More women are choosing to stay at home, and it will absolutely have unintended consequences down the road.
And I have a personal experience. I mean, before the pandemic, I was working in association management. I was explicitly told, you work from home, we can never pay you more than this, because what message would it send to the others? I don't work from there anymore.
Sarah, beyond what the great advice Lauren just gave, what else can nonprofits do to entice people to come back into the office?
So I completely agree. It has to have purpose. If you're going to bring people back in, they'll look at your small team on sites. You know, there is value to being together. So if you can start using your office as instead of getting a hotel room or a conference someplace, can you start using your office for that kind of in-service meeting? I work with one particular group where we're instituting first Thursday on site, and it'll be a no email day. You know, we're going to get together and tackle all the projects that get gobbled up by email the rest of the time and make sure that we're on track with things, check in on our project management plans for getting things done. So I think if you can take that intention, take that context and put it into something that's workable, that's key. I also think, for some of the groups that I work with, they're very fortunate that their realtors are good partners, their place spanners are good partners, and they're really looking at how their space is used so that it is enticing for people to have those days on site, to come in and use the building reasonably, but not just to drag people in to sit in DC to answer email or New York or something. I mean, that can be done anywhere, right?
It's going to take more than bagels.
Yeah.
Well, the way I met Lauren, she and I were both speaking at a client of mine's conference. I was speaking on some association legal issues, and she was speaking about, how to successfully deal with remote work. What are tips and strategies? And she was brilliant, and that's how we connected. And that's why one of the reasons I thought she'd be great for this panel, and I was right. But let's talk about remote work, because for most nonprofit organizations, not all, but certainly for most, remote work is here to stay. For some, it's full time. For some, it's hybrid. But you'd be hard pressed to find any nonprofit that doesn't have. Obviously, a lot of this was going on pre-pandemic, but these days and just overall in our country, it's here to stay. So, let me start with you, Lauren. What are maybe like the top 3 or even top 2 things that tips, suggestions for successful remote work environments in nonprofits?
Well, I actually have 12 keys. I have an ebook, and I'm happy to put the link, or you can message me, but it's all about trust. You have to have trust. And a lot of this, what I've noticed is that, and there was an article about it, I think in the Wall Street Journal, that your boss doesn't trust you working from home. They don't think you're working if they can't see you working. So the first is to check your level of trust. It's not you have trust or you don't have trust. It's where is someone on a scale of 1 to 10? And if you don't have that trust built up, what is it that you need to do and have a shared agreement around to understand what their work delivery is going to be, how you're going to be accountable to them, and vice versa. So there needs to be that process. And I'm probably building more than 3 on this, but it starts with trust. It adds on with shared agreements, and then it adds on further with accountability. So that's with the check-ins. That's with what do you notice? What patterns have you seen? Is this someone a good fit for working remotely? And if you notice over time in the performance that, hey, we've given it 30, 60, 90 days, we've seen a decline in your work performance, let's try coming back into the office 1 or 2 days a week. It's not a punishment, but it's really allowing someone to say, hey, this isn't a good environment for me, or my tech isn't right, or nobody's checking in on me. That's a big thing. People feel completely disconnected from their teams, and people work better by just having that good morning. Hey, what's going on? You need any help with anything? Just checking in. This isn't micromanaging helicopter. It's what we call macro management, looking for big trends, looking for big picture, looking for roles and responsibilities.
Excellent. Sarah, what can you add on about productivity? You know, are people really working? How can we maximize productivity, ensure a good work-life balance? You know, other things beyond what Lauren just said to create a successful remote work environment. Sarah?
I think I read the same article, and there was something about, you know, supervisors thought people were only working 12% of the time. People felt completely opposite. I think trust is definitely it. I do think we have to remember that the goal is outcomes in most of our roles. Certainly when we're talking about exempt staff, we're looking at, am I getting the output that I need? Am I getting things in a timely manner, and are people engaged? You know, work-life balance is tough. I'll get a little tactical here. I think we can change the way we're using our technology. Work-life balance, one great thing, you and your employee can throw a headset on and go for a walk together 3,000 miles apart and have an actual walking meeting. Change the headspace, change the view, get some fresh air. You know, technology can be our friend, not just a hindrance or chaining us to a desk. So I think it's just shifting how we're using these things and what we're really using them for. But, you know, focus on productivity, not hours sitting in a chair.
Lauren, what are some of the potential challenges and backlashes that you've seen of a mismanaged back to the office campaign?
Well, I mean, we were talking about trust. Immediately, it's the lack of trust that's there. So you have people who don't feel safe from a physical standpoint, from an environmental standpoint. You have people who don't feel supported in their home life. So they don't have childcare. They don't have caregiving for other family members, budgetary reasons. I think in general, if people don't feel seen and heard, they immediately drop loyalty. And I think that's the big question, as like, how loyal do you want to be to a company that's not loyal to you and your needs? And I think people are asking that question, and we might have a slowdown in the response because of an incoming recession and the fear that comes from that. But I think there's going to be a reflection period of, I deserve more. This is a choice where I work and the work that I do and who I do it for. And I have options. And so if you aren't considering people, they're taking that into consideration.
Excellent. Sarah, this question's for you, related, and I have a personal selfish reason for asking it. We just hired a new attorney who's going to be full-time remote from Oregon, and I'm super excited for her to join us next month. One of the things that's important to her is collaboration with me, with our other three lawyers. But she's going to be obviously full-time remote. We'll fly her here 2-3 times a year for some kind of firm retreats and whatnot. But because this applies to every single employer these days with remote workers, what are some tips and suggestions actually for Sarah or Lauren that I can use, we can use in our firm, and that all nonprofits can use to create more collaboration, to create more connectivity between us, most of whom are here in DC, and our new attorney out in Oregon?
I think the first thing I'd look at your tech stack. What tools do you have? Are you really using them? I go into different employee or client environments, and there's all kinds of wonderful systems and tools out there within their security shell, Chad, but they're not necessarily using them. You know, can you tap into Slack? Can you use Teams? What are you using besides email and snail mail and all those older style connection points? But the other thing I think is structure how the organization works. Do we have core hours? Do we look at, and especially when you've got international or people across the country, how do you set that up so that you know that people are generally available to each other? And then that's our key communication time. And the time before and after that is dependent on people's schedules and what they're working on. But those are two pretty tactical but concrete things to consider.
Lauren, 30 seconds back to you, and then we got to go to our final topic.
You got it. So I would get really curious about what collaboration means to each person. So I coach a completely asynchronous and remote team. They have Slack as their main communication platform. They also have intentionality around when they're meeting with each other, what they're discussing about. So it's being clear about this is a time for collaboration. This is how we're using ongoing communication, whether it's Slack, Google Docs, whatever it is. And then it's maintaining the reciprocity. So if someone's asking for collaboration, you have to meet them where they are, and there has to be an exchange. And I think also incorporate fun as much as you can, like put music on, like just get in a room or a Zoom room or whatever it is and have fun. Like that's the opportunity to really start to spark creativity and innovation.
I love that. Okay, Therese, my apologies. We only have less than 5 minutes left for our final topic, which is budgeting in times of uncertainty. So rapid fire.
Who wants to talk about budgeting?
I mean, I'm not going to lie. There's a reason why I put it last.
I know, right? Exactly.
No offense.
Exactly.
All right. So obviously you're deeply involved in the budgeting process in your association. So how do you build sustainability into your operations and cycles?
I mean, if sustainability isn't part of a nonprofit's mission or in our North Star for a lot of our programs, for our mission, for serving our members, then it needs to be. And so when we think about sustainability, what we were able to do is there's a lot of great tools. A sustainability mindset tool that you kind of analyze both the profitability and the programmatic impact, because we know in the world of nonprofits, there are a lot of programs that really don't generate a surplus. And obviously we look to maintain and meet those surpluses as opposed to operate as a deficit. And so we were able to kind of take a portfolio approach and compare apples to apples by using some of these tools. There's a lot through the American Society of Association Executives. Like I said, I mentioned this sustainability matrix. That you could really analyze different programs and services, but then also when it comes to budgeting, obviously what you lack in certainty, you have to make up for in clarity. And so what we do by that is kind of using those margin-based approaches to budgeting, and then really going deep into each of the line items for our contracted vendors, relying on a plug for a wonderful legal resource to review those contracts, finding some may be going bankrupt as a result of having some conversations, and then being able to adapt your pricing by having a good pricing policy and be able to adjust pricing so that you continue to meet those margins as a baseline for your operating budgets going forward.
Thank you. Final kind of two-part question. How can an organization plan budgets around global uncertainty that we're all facing these days? And how has your association's approach to budgeting changed as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're all facing inflation. And so I know that what we've been doing, especially having just completed our budget and survived to tell the story, that we're kind of building in some discretionary inflationary pricing as well as expense, unplanned expense into budgets, and trying to really look industry by industry, especially our event budget, which every nonprofit that continues to offer events will need to really put those through kind of really under the microscope to lock in some pricing and costs to try to mitigate any risk for the year ahead.
And so kind of that second part of my question, as a result of the pandemic, as well as the global uncertainty that we're seeing and beyond the inflation measures or protections you're building in, how has your approach to budgeting changed from pre-pandemic?
We do really budget more intentionally around key results. And I know that when talking about the world of hybrid work, it's not just productivity, it's outcomes, because then that is built with trust in there that you know they're going to get the work done by being productive. And so focusing on key results and outcomes, and then building specific roadmaps to achieve those outcomes. A lot of programs are built, you'd think on a wing and a prayer, that we know we have a need, that we want to serve our members or advance the profession, but there's really not strong goals or key results that you start the program with. So building those into kind of like the core plans and developing those roadmap, we've gotten a lot stronger at being able to do that. It's sort of like building muscle memory now as we launch new programs or revisit and build programs for 2023. Knowing that it's not a certainty anymore that this program will grow or the necessary revenue stream behind it will materialize.
That's great advice. And on that, we are at time. I want to thank all 5 of our panelists for a terrific job today. Just really, really valuable, practical, helpful information. Thanks to all of you for participating. Thanks to FAR and Donna for co-sponsoring this program. As I said earlier, everyone will get an email tomorrow or Monday at the latest with a link to the recording of today's program. Feel free to share that with your colleagues and others you think that would benefit from it. And keep an eye out for our next program in several months from now. We have some exciting ideas that we're pulling together and look forward to the next nonprofit advisory program. So on behalf of all of our panelists and hosts, and a special thanks, last but not least, to and Nicole and Veronica and the team at Seville's, which for the first time is hosting today's platform and handled the registration and the marketing and all of the rest of the program. They did a really terrific job, and they have to deal with me, which is no easy task, who's a perfectionist to no end. My apologies for having to deal with me, but thank you for a terrific job. And we really, on behalf of the Nonprofit Advisory Board and FAR, we thank you very much for your contributions to this.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.